My name is Carter. I'm 28 years old, and I never thought my own mother would text me. We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now, haha. I stared at my phone in disbelief, standing in front of the house I grew up in, the same house I'd been helping pay for years. I had just lost my job, my girlfriend dumped me, and now my own mother and her controlling husband had locked me out of my home. What they didn't know was that I was about to discover something that would change everything. Before I begin my story about how I legally claimed half of the house, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And hit that like button if you've ever been betrayed by family members who were supposed to have your back. My family story isn't unique, but the ending certainly is. My parents divorced when I was 12 years old. The split wasn't particularly nasty, just two people who had fallen out of love and decided to part ways before things got ugly. My dad, James, moved to an apartment across town, and I split my time between both parents. We maintained a decent relationship, all things considered. When I was 15, my mom Sandra started dating Harold. At first, Harold seemed like a decent guy. He had a stable job as a bank manager, drove a nice car, and always brought little gifts for me whenever he came over. He made my mom laugh in a way I hadn't seen since before the divorce, so I was cautiously optimistic about their relationship. They got married after dating for just 8 months. The wedding was small, just close family and a few friends at the local garden center. I remember feeling uneasy about how quickly they were moving, but I kept those thoughts to myself. My mom deserved happiness, and who was I, a teenager, to question her judgment? The changes were subtle at first. Harold would make small comments about the way my mom dressed or the friends she spent time with. He'd check her phone when she wasn't looking, claiming he was just borrowing it to look something up. He'd question her about where she'd been, if she was even 15 minutes late coming home from work. Soon my mom started wearing the clothes he approved of, seeing the friends he liked, and always making sure to be home exactly when expected. Before Harold entered our lives, my mom and I had a great relationship. We would have movie nights every Friday, complete with homemade popcorn and ice cream sundaes. She would come to all my soccer games and science fairs. We would talk about everything, from school drama to deeper conversations about life and the future. She was my rock, my confidant, my biggest supporter. After Harold moved in, those movie nights became less frequent, eventually stopping altogether because Harold preferred watching sports on Friday nights. My mom started missing my games and school events because Harold thought they were a waste of time. Our heart-to-heart talks dwindled until they became surface-level exchanges about the weather and mundane daily activities. When it came time for college, I chose to attend a university in California, partly because of the excellent computer science program, but also to get some distance from the increasingly tense household. The day my mom and Harold dropped me off at the dorms was the first time I felt like I could breathe freely in years. After graduating with a degree in computer science, I landed a job at a promising startup in San Francisco. The pay was good, the work was challenging, and I was finally building my own life. Despite the distance and our strained relationship, I still called my mom regularly and sent money home each month to help with the mortgage. The house in Boston was where I grew up, where all my childhood memories were stored, and I felt a responsibility to help maintain it, especially since my dad had passed away during my sophomore year of college. What I didn't know at the time was that those monthly contributions would later become crucial evidence in my legal battle. The house itself was a 2-story colonial in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Boston. White with blue shutters, a wraparound porch where I'd spent countless summer evenings reading books or playing video games, and a backyard with an old oak tree that still held the remnants of the treehouse my dad and I built when I was 9. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, overlooking the street, with glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling from when I went through my astronomy phase in middle school. Over the years, my relationship with Harold deteriorated from uncomfortable to downright hostile. Whenever I visited, he would make snide comments about my career choice, my appearance, my relationship status, anything he could use to chip away at my self-esteem. He seemed threatened by my bond with my mom, as tenuous as it had become, and did everything he could to drive a wedge between us. The last time I visited before everything fell apart, Harold had accidentally thrown away a box of my childhood memorabilia that had been stored in the attic. Baseball cards my dad had given me, school projects my mom had proudly displayed, photos from family vacations before the divorce. When I confronted him, he shrugged and said, "We needed the space. You don't live here anymore." My mom stood silently behind him, not defending me or the memories he had discarded. That was when I realized how much control Harold had over her. She wasn't the same woman who had raised me, who had taught me to stand up for myself and what I believed in. She had become a shadow, an echo of the person she once was. I left that visit early, with a heavy heart and a growing concern for my mom's well-being. Little did I know that I would soon be returning under much different circumstances. Life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you, just when you think you've got everything figured out. For me, that moment came on a rainy Tuesday in April. I walked into the office to find everyone gathered in the main conference room, faces solemn. Our CEO, a usually energetic woman in her 40s, looked like she hadn't slept in days. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice cracking slightly. "We've lost our main investor, and without that funding, we can't continue operations." Just like that, the startup I'd devoted 3 years of my life to was shutting down. We had 2 weeks to wrap up our projects and clear out our desks. My team and I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the abrupt ending of what we thought was a promising venture. That evening, I returned to the apartment I shared with Jessica, my girlfriend of 3 years, dreading having to tell her the news. Jessica was a graphic designer at a marketing firm, creative and passionate about her work. We had met at a tech conference and bonded over our shared love of indie films and spicy Thai food. "It'll be okay," she said after I told her about the company folding. "You're talented, you'll find something else quickly." Her optimism was one of the things I loved about her, but in this case, it was misplaced. The tech market in San Francisco was oversaturated, and dozens of other startups were also failing, flooding the job market with experienced developers all competing for the same positions. 2 months later, with my savings dwindling and no job prospects in sight, the strain started to show in our relationship. Jessica had been covering more than her share of the rent, and the financial imbalance was creating tension. "Maybe you should expand your search," she suggested one night, over a dinner of reheated pasta. "Look outside of San Francisco, or even consider remote positions." "I'm trying," I said, frustration evident in my voice. "I've applied to over 100 jobs, had dozens of interviews, but nothing has panned out." The argument that followed wasn't our first, but it was the most devastating. Words were said that couldn't be taken back, insecurities were exposed, and by the end of it, Jessica was in tears and I was sleeping on the couch. The next morning, she sat down beside me, eyes red from crying. "I think we need to take a break," she said softly. "This isn't working for either of us right now." I knew she was right, but it didn't make the pain any less acute. Within a week, I had moved out of our shared apartment and into a friend's spare room, adding another layer of failure to my rapidly crumbling life. With rent in San Francisco being what it was, I couldn't afford to get my own place, even with the reduced expenses of being single. My friend's generosity had a time limit, and as the weeks passed with no job offers materializing, I knew I needed to make a difficult decision. I called my mom on a Sunday afternoon, hoping to catch her when Harold might be out golfing or watching sports at a bar with his friends. "Mom," I said after we'd exchanged the usual pleasantries, "I need to ask a favor." "What is it, honey?" she asked, her voice cautious. "I lost my job a few months ago, and I haven't been able to find another one here. Jessica and I broke up, and I swallowed hard, hating how pathetic I sounded. I need to come home for a while, just until I can get back on my feet." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that I thought we'd been disconnected. "Mom, are you still there?" "Yes," she finally responded, her voice tight. I'll need to talk to Harold about this." "It's still my home too," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice, "and I've been helping with the mortgage." "I know, but Harold, you know how he is. Let me talk to him and call you back." She called back 3 hours later, her voice hushed as if she was hiding in another room to make the call. "You can come home," she said quickly, "but Harold has some conditions." The conditions were numerous and ridiculous. I would have a curfew, I would pay rent in addition to continuing my mortgage contributions, I would do specific chores around the house, I would not have friends over, I would not use the living room when Harold was watching TV, which was basically all the time. I swallowed my pride and agreed to everything. What choice did I have? With a heavy heart and a severely bruised ego, I packed up what little I had left and booked a one-way ticket to Boston. When I arrived at the house, my mom greeted me with a quick hug at the door, looking over her shoulder as if afraid Harold might see her showing me affection. Harold wasn't home, which was a small mercy. I took my bags up to my old bedroom, which had been converted into a home office but still had a twin bed crammed into the corner. As I unpacked my meager belongings, I felt a crushing sense of failure. At 28, I was back in my childhood bedroom, jobless, single, and subjected to rules more suitable for a teenager than an adult. But beneath that feeling of failure was a flicker of determination. This was temporary, I told myself. Just a stepping stone on the path to rebuilding my life. The first few days were tense, but manageable. Harold was coldly civil, my mom was nervously accommodating, and I did my best to be invisible, spending most of my time in my room applying for jobs and networking online. I found a small bit of solace in the backyard, particularly near the old oak tree. Sitting under its sprawling branches, I could almost feel my dad's presence, his encouragement, his belief in me. It was there that I decided, no matter how difficult things got, I would persevere. I would find my way back to independence and self-respect. What I didn't realize was just how difficult things would get, and how soon the real battle would begin. Harold didn't waste any time establishing his dominance over the household and making it clear that I was an unwelcome intruder rather than a family member in need. Within the first week, he taped a list of house rules to my bedroom door while I was showering. The list was extensive and absurd. No use of kitchen between 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. Laundry can only be done on Tuesdays between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. No guests at any time. Must be in bedroom by 10 p.m. on weeknights, 11 p.m. on weekends. No streaming or downloads that use excessive bandwidth. No food or drinks in bedroom. The list went on, each rule more restrictive than the last. When I took the paper to my mom and asked if she thought these rules were reasonable for a 28-year-old adult, she just sighed and said, "It's his house too, Carter. Please try to get along." "It's my house too," I reminded her. "I've been helping pay the mortgage for years." "That was your choice," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We never asked you to do that." Her response stung, but I bit my tongue. Arguing wouldn't help my situation. Instead, I focused my energy on finding a job, any job, that would allow me to move out as soon as possible. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, I landed a remote position as an IT support specialist for a mid-sized company based in Chicago. The pay was significantly less than what I'd made in San Francisco, but it was steady income, and I could work from anywhere with an internet connection. The day I shared the news with my mom and Harold over dinner, I expected at least a modicum of happiness for my success. My mom managed a tight smile and a quiet, "That's nice, dear." Harold's response was to ask how much I'd be paying in rent now that I was employed. "I thought I was already contributing to the household by paying part of the mortgage," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "That's different," Harold said dismissively. "That's for your stake in the property. Rent is for living here now, using utilities, eating food." I wanted to argue, to point out the absurdity of paying both a share of the mortgage and rent on top of that, but the look on my mom's face stopped me. She was silently pleading with me not to make waves. So I swallowed my pride once again and agreed to pay the amount Harold demanded. As the weeks passed, my mom became increasingly distant. She would avoid being alone with me, constantly checking her phone as if expecting Harold to text her for updates on my whereabouts and activities. One evening, I overheard her on the phone with her sister, my Aunt Laura. I know, my mom was saying in a hushed voice. "But Harold says having him here is stressing him out. He says Carter doesn't respect him, that he's a negative influence." I didn't catch what my aunt said in response, but my mom's reply made my heart sink. "What choice do I have, Laura? You know how Harold gets when he doesn't get his way." I retreated to my room before she could catch me eavesdropping, my mind racing. What did she mean by how Harold gets? Was she afraid of him? Was there more going on than just his controlling behavior? The next day, I returned from a quick trip to the grocery store to find my bedroom door open and Harold rummaging through my desk drawer. "What are you doing?" I demanded, anger overriding my usual attempt at peacekeeping. Harold didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. "Checking for drugs," he said casually, as if invading my privacy was his right. "Drugs? Are you serious? I've never done drugs in my life." "People change," he said with a shrug. and I have a right to know what's happening in my house. This is my room, my personal space, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. You can't just go through my things. Harold straightened up, his face darkening. I can do whatever I want. This is my house, and you're here on my charity. I pay part of the mortgage and now rent on top of that. That's not charity, that's exploitation, I shot back. You ungrateful little punk, Harold spat. After all I've done for you and your mother, all you've done is isolate her from her family and friends, control every aspect of her life, and treat her son like an unwanted guest. The sound of keys in the front door interrupted our argument. My mom walked in, arms full of groceries, her face falling as she sensed the tension in the air. What's going on? She asked, looking between us nervously. Your son is being disrespectful again, Harold said before I could speak. I caught him trying to hide something in his room. That's a lie, I exclaimed. Mom, I came home and found him going through my things. My mom set the groceries down, her hands shaking slightly. Harold, we talked about this. Carter deserves privacy. Not in my house he doesn't, Harold insisted. Not when he's living here on our generosity. I pay toward the mortgage, I reminded them both. And now rent too. This is my home as much as it is yours. No, it's not, Harold said with a sneer. Your name isn't on any documents. You're just a guest, and an unwelcome one at that. The argument escalated, with Harold growing more belligerent and my mom becoming increasingly distressed, begging us both to calm down. It ended with Harold storming out of the house and my mom in tears. Why do you have to antagonize him? She asked me, wiping her eyes. You know how he gets. Mom, can't you see how controlling and abusive he is? I asked gently. He takes care of me, she said defensively. He provides for me. Dad left you well provided for, I pointed out. And I help too. It's not the same, she insisted, turning away from me to start putting away the groceries, effectively ending the conversation. The next day, I came home from a walk to find several of my belongings missing. My laptop bag, though thankfully I'd taken the laptop with me, a framed photo of my dad and me fishing when I was 10, and a vintage record player my dad had given me before he died. When I confronted Harold, he feigned ignorance, but the smug look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. My mom, as usual, tried to play peacemaker, suggesting that perhaps I had misplaced these items. The situation reached a breaking point when Harold accused me of running up the electricity bill with my computer equipment. He presented a bill that was indeed higher than usual, ranting about how I was taking advantage of them. You work from home all day, using our electricity, our internet, eating our food, he railed. And what do we get in return? Disrespect and financial burden. I pay rent and contribute to the mortgage, I reminded him, my patience wearing dangerously thin. And I buy my own food. Not enough, Harold said dismissively. Not nearly enough for the trouble you cause. That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of how to escape this toxic situation. I had been saving every penny from my new job, but I still didn't have enough for first and last month's rent, plus a security deposit on an apartment in the Boston area. I felt trapped, with nowhere to turn and no way out. Little did I know, things were about to go from bad to worse, and the true extent of Harold and my mom's betrayal was yet to be revealed. 2 months after moving back into my childhood home, I received an email from my company's Chicago headquarters. They needed someone to come in for 2 days of training on a new system we would be implementing. It wasn't ideal timing, given the tension at home, but I couldn't refuse without jeopardizing my job. When I told my mom about the trip, she seemed relieved, probably welcoming a break from playing referee between Harold and me. Harold, on the other hand, made a show of checking the locks on his office and bedroom, as if I might use his absence to snoop through his things, exactly what he had done to me. The night before my departure, Harold and I had our worst confrontation yet. I was in the kitchen, preparing a late dinner after working overtime, when Harold stormed in, red-faced and holding his credit card bill. "What is this?" he demanded, shoving the paper in my face. I glanced at it, confused. "Your credit card statement? How would I know?" "There's a charge here for $200 at Best Buy," he said, jabbing his finger at the line item. "I never bought anything at Best Buy." "And you think I used your credit card?" I asked incredulously. "Why would I do that?" "To get back at me," he spat. "For the rules, for making you pay your fair share." "That's insane," I said, turning back to my dinner. "I have my own credit card. I don't need to steal from you." "Don't you walk away from me," Harold shouted, grabbing my arm roughly. I jerked away from his grip. "Don't touch me," I warned, my voice dangerously low. My mom appeared in the doorway, drawn by the shouting. "What's going on?" "Your son is a thief," Harold declared. "He used my credit card to buy computer stuff." "I did no such thing," I said firmly. "Mom, you can't possibly believe that." But the doubt in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. After everything, after all the years of supporting her, sending money home, being a dutiful son, she was choosing to believe Harold over me. "Carter," she said hesitantly, "if you're having money troubles, you should have just asked for help." I stared at her in disbelief. "I didn't use his card. I would never steal. You raised me better than that. At least, the person you used to be did." Her face crumpled at my words, but Harold stepped between us. "Don't you talk to your mother like that. After all we've done for you, letting you stay here when you had nowhere else to go." "Letting me stay?" I echoed. "This is my home too. I've been paying toward this house for years." "It's our house," Harold countered. "Your mother's and mine. You're just a freeloader who can't keep a job or a girlfriend." That hit a nerve, and I struggled to maintain my composure. "I'm leaving for New York tomorrow," I said as calmly as I could. "We can discuss this when I get back." "There's nothing to discuss," Harold said dismissively. "I want you out of this house by the end of the month." "Harold," my mom interjected weakly. "It's almost winter. Where will he go?" "Not our problem," Harold said coldly. "He's a grown man. Let him figure it out." I looked at my mom, silently pleading with her to stand up for me, to remember the bond we once had. Instead, she lowered her eyes and said quietly, "Maybe it would be best if you found your own place, Carter. For everyone's sake." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My own mother, choosing her controlling husband over her son. I grabbed my plate and retreated to my room, appetite gone, replaced by a hollow feeling in my chest. The next morning I left for New York early, without saying goodbye. I took my laptop, a change of clothes, and my essential documents, planning to deal with the fallout when I returned. I tried calling my mom from the airport, wanting to clear the air before leaving town, but the call went straight to voicemail. My 2 days in New York were a blur of training sessions and hotel room anxiety. I tried calling my mom multiple times, but she never answered. I even tried our landline, but no one picked up. By the time I boarded my return flight to Boston, I had a knot of dread in my stomach. That dread turned to disbelief when I arrived home late Thursday night and found that my key no longer worked in the lock. I tried again, thinking perhaps I was using the wrong key, but all 3 locks had been changed. I rang the doorbell, knocked loudly, even called out for my mom, but the house remained dark and silent. I was standing on the porch wondering what to do next when my phone chimed with a text message. It was from my mom. "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now. Haha." I stared at the message, unable to process the cruelty of it. The haha at the end was particularly jarring, so unlike my mom's usual text style. I suspected Harold had either dictated the message or sent it himself from her phone. I tried calling her, but my call was rejected. I sent a text asking what was going on, only to find that I had been blocked. In the space of 2 days, I had been completely cut off and locked out of my own home. It was nearly midnight, and I had nowhere to go. I sat in my rental car for hours, alternating between anger, hurt, and disbelief. Eventually, I drove to a 24-hour diner where I nursed a cup of coffee until dawn, trying to figure out my next move. The following day, I returned to the house during daylight hours, hoping to catch my mom when Harold might be at work. No one answered the door, but I noticed our elderly neighbor, Michael, watching from his porch across the street. Michael had lived there since before I was born and had always been kind to me. I approached him, explaining my situation as calmly as I could. "I saw them leave early this morning," he said, shaking his head sympathetically. "Your mom looked upset, but that husband of hers was practically dragging her to the car." "Did she say anything to you about changing the locks?" I asked. Michael hesitated. "She didn't, but I've seen a lot of fighting lately. And yesterday, I saw your stepdad throwing some of your things into the trash." My heart sank. My things? What things? Boxes, mostly. Some clothes, books. What looked like photo albums, Michael said regretfully. I would have stopped him, but by the time I realized what was happening, the garbage truck had already come. The thought of Harold throwing away my possessions, especially photos and mementos that could never be replaced, made my blood boil. But anger wouldn't solve my immediate problem. I was homeless, with limited funds, and most of my belongings locked inside the house. "If you need a place to stay for a night or two, my spare room is available," Michael offered kindly. I thanked him, but declined, not wanting to involve him further in what was clearly becoming a volatile situation. Instead, I spent another night in my car, parked a few blocks away from the house, hoping for a chance to talk to my mom. The next day, I saw her car pull into the driveway. I approached quickly, calling out to her before she could get inside. She turned, her face paling when she saw me. "Mom, please," I said, keeping my distance to avoid scaring her. "What's going on? Why did you change the locks?" "Carter, you need to leave," she said, her voice shaking. "Harold says you're not welcome here anymore." "But why? What have I done?" I asked, genuinely perplexed. "Is this about the credit card? Because I swear to you, I didn't use it." "It's not just that," she said, glancing nervously at the house. "It's everything. The fighting, the tension. Harold can't take it anymore." "What about what I can take?" I countered. "I've been paying toward this house for years. I have rights." "No, you don't," she said firmly. "The house is in our names." Harold checked with a lawyer. Before I could respond, the front door opened, and Harold appeared, his face twisted with anger. "Sandra, get inside now," he commanded. Then to me, "Leave, or I'm calling the police." "For what?" I challenged. "Standing on the sidewalk?" "For trespassing," Harold threatened. "And harassment." My mom gave me one last look, a mixture of sadness and resignation in her eyes, before hurrying inside. Harold followed, slamming the door behind them. I stood there for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My own mother had chosen Harold over me, had allowed him to lock me out of my home, to throw away my possessions, to treat me like a criminal rather than family. With nowhere else to turn, I drove to the only place I could think of, Ryan's apartment. Ryan had been my best friend since high school, and though we didn't see each other as often now that we lived on opposite coasts, we had stayed in touch. When I arrived at his door, disheveled, exhausted, and on the verge of tears, he took one look at me and pulled me into a hug. "Whatever it is," he said, "we'll figure it out together." As I collapsed onto his couch, the events of the past few days finally catching up to me, I had no idea that Ryan's offer of help would lead to a discovery that would change everything. That, in trying to shut me out, Harold and my mom had set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately reveal a secret they had been keeping from me for years. Ryan's apartment was small but welcoming, a one-bedroom in Cambridge that he decorated with vintage concert posters and string lights. He cleared off his futon for me and didn't ask too many questions that first night, sensing that I needed time to process. After a hot shower and a solid night's sleep, I felt more like myself again. Over coffee the next morning, I told Ryan everything: losing my job, breaking up with Jessica, moving back home, the escalating tension with Harold, and finally being locked out of my own house. "That's messed up," Ryan said, shaking his head. "I never liked that guy. Your mom changed after she married him." "I keep thinking about what she said," I mused. "That I have no legal right to the house. But I've been sending money for the mortgage for years. Doesn't that count for something?" Ryan considered this. "I'm not sure, but I have a friend who might know. Jennifer's a real estate attorney. Want me to give her a call?" I nodded gratefully. Any help would be appreciated at this point. Jennifer agreed to meet with us for coffee that afternoon. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her early 30s, with a keen legal mind and a compassionate demeanor. I explained my situation again, emphasizing the financial contributions I'd made to the house over the years. "So you've been sending money specifically for the mortgage?" she clarified. "Not just general financial support for your mom?" "Yes," I confirmed. The emails and transfer memos all specified for mortgage payment. I've been doing it since my dad died, about 6 years ago. Jennifer made a note. "And your father? Did he own the house with your mother before they divorced?" "Yes, they bought it together when I was a baby. After the divorce, my mom kept the house, and Dad moved to an apartment." "Do you know if your father's name was removed from the deed after the divorce?" she asked. I thought about it. "I'm not sure. I was only 12 when they split up. I never really paid attention to the legal details." "What about your father's will?" Jennifer continued. When he passed away, did he leave anything to you? Mom handled all of that, I said. She told me he left some money for my education, which helped with college, but that was it. Jennifer's expression turned thoughtful. Would you mind if I looked into the property records? And if you could provide me with documentation of your mortgage payments, that would be helpful too. I agreed readily, sending her copies of my bank statements, showing years of regular transfers to my mom with mortgage contribution in the memo line. Ryan let me use his laptop to access my cloud storage, where I kept digital copies of important documents. 3 days later, Jennifer called and asked if we could meet again, this time at her office. Her tone was serious but excited, like someone who had discovered something significant. When Ryan and I arrived at her sleek downtown office, Jennifer was waiting with a folder of documents spread out on her conference table. "Carter," she began, "I found some very interesting information. First, the property records show that your father, James, was indeed on the deed to the house with your mother. After the divorce, he remained a co-owner." I frowned. That doesn't make sense. Why would he keep paying for a house he didn't live in? "That's where it gets interesting," Jennifer continued. "According to the records, your father continued to pay half the mortgage until his death. After he died, the house should have been subject to probate, since he still owned half of it." "Probate?" I asked, unfamiliar with the term. "It's the legal process of administering a deceased person's estate," Jennifer explained, "including distributing assets according to their will." "But my mom said Dad only left money for my education," I said, confused. Jennifer slid a document across the table to me. "I obtained a copy of your father's will from the county records. It's public record once it goes through probate." I scanned the document, my heart racing as I read a particular paragraph that Jennifer had highlighted. "To my son Carter, I leave my 50% interest in the property at 528 Maple Street, to be held in trust until his 25th birthday, at which time full ownership shall transfer to him." I looked up at Jennifer, stunned. "I own half the house? Since I turned 25? "Technically, yes," Jennifer confirmed. "But there's a problem. This will was never properly executed through probate. Your mother, as the executor named in the will, had a legal obligation to file the will with the probate court after your father's death. It appears that never happened." "Are you saying she hid this from me?" I asked, the implications slowly sinking in. "It certainly looks that way," Jennifer said carefully. "And what's more, those mortgage payments you've been making? They effectively constitute acknowledgement of your ownership interest in the property. You've been paying your share of a home you already legally owned." I sat back, trying to process this information. My father had left me half the house. My mother had kept this information from me for years, continuing to accept my mortgage payments for a property I partially owned, and now she and Harold had locked me out of my own home. "What can I do?" I asked, a mixture of hurt and anger churning inside me. "We have several options," Jennifer said, "all business now. First, I can send a formal letter to your mother and Harold, outlining your legal claim to the property and demanding access to your home. If they refuse, we can file an emergency petition for access to retrieve your belongings. And simultaneously, we can initiate a lawsuit to enforce your inheritance rights under your father's will." "Will this work?" I asked. "Harold said they checked with a lawyer who told them I have no rights." Jennifer smiled grimly. "Either their lawyer is incompetent, or they didn't tell him the full story about your father's will and your ongoing mortgage payments. With the documentation we have, your position is quite strong." As Jennifer outlined the legal strategy, I felt conflicting emotions. Part of me was angry, betrayed by my mother's deception. Another part was sad, wondering how our relationship had deteriorated to this point. And a small, vindictive part of me was looking forward to seeing the look on Harold's face when he realized he couldn't simply bully me out of what was legally mine. "How long will this take?" I asked. "The initial letter can go out tomorrow," Jennifer replied. "Depending on their response, we could be in court within a week for the emergency access order. The full inheritance case might take longer, but given the clear language of the will and your documented payments, we have a strong case." I spent that night at Ryan's, tossing and turning as I replayed conversations with my mom over the years. Had there been hints about my inheritance that I'd missed? Was Harold the driving force behind the deception, or had my mom willingly hidden this from me? The mother I thought I knew would never have done something like this, but then again she wasn't that person anymore. The next day, Jennifer's office sent a certified letter to my mother and Harold, outlining my legal claim to the property and demanding immediate access to retrieve my belongings. The letter also stated our intention to file for an emergency court order if they did not comply within 48 hours. The response came not from my mother, but from a law firm representing her and Harold. Their email was terse. "We have a problem. Call immediately." Jennifer handled the call, putting it on speaker so I could listen. The lawyer on the other end sounded nervous, admitting that his clients had not informed him about my father's will or my ongoing mortgage payments. He requested a meeting to discuss a resolution before the matter went to court. As we prepared for the meeting, gathering documents and building our case, I couldn't help but wonder how my mother would react when confronted with the truth. Would she finally stand up to Harold? Would she apologize for the deception? Or would she continue to choose him over her own son? Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I would never again allow myself to be bullied, manipulated, or made to feel unwelcome in a home that was rightfully mine. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Tuesday at Jennifer's office. I arrived early, stomach churning with a mixture of anxiety and determination. Jennifer greeted me with a reassuring smile, her confidence bolstering my own. "Remember," she said as we waited in the conference room, "stay calm, let me do most of the talking, and don't let them provoke you into saying something emotional. This is a legal matter now, not a family dispute." I nodded, taking deep breaths to center myself. At precisely 10, Jennifer's assistant showed in my mother, Harold, and their attorney, a nervous-looking man in his 50s named Arthur Simmons. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes as she took a seat across from me. She looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched, her normally neat hair looking unkempt. Harold, on the other hand, glared at me defiantly, his posture rigid with anger. "Thank you for coming," Jennifer began professionally. "As outlined in our letter, we're here to discuss my client's legal interest in the property at 528 Maple Street, as well as the immediate return of his personal belongings." Arthur cleared his throat. "Before we proceed, I want to clarify that my clients were not aware of any complications regarding the property's ownership." "With all due respect," Jennifer countered, sliding copies of my father's will across the table, "Mrs. Brennan was named as the executor of this will. She had a legal obligation to file it with the probate court, which she failed to do. Furthermore, she has been accepting mortgage payments from my client for a property he already partially owned by inheritance." Harold's face reddened. "Those were gifts, not mortgage payments," he interjected. Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "We have 6 years of bank transfers with mortgage contribution, clearly noted in the memo field. Additionally, we have emails between Mr. Jenkins and his mother specifically discussing these payments in relation to the mortgage." My mother finally looked up, her expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. "We needed the money," she said quietly. "After your father died, things were tight financially." "That doesn't excuse hiding his will from me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "or accepting payments for a house I partially owned." "You don't understand," my mother insisted. "Harold and I have put so much into that house. New roof, new kitchen, landscaping. We've earned our ownership." "Improvements don't negate legal ownership," Jennifer pointed out calmly. "If anything, as a co-owner, Mr. Jenkins would be entitled to a share of the increased property value resulting from those improvements." Harold slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. We're not giving him half our house just because he sent some money over the years." "It's not about the money I sent," I clarified. "It's about the fact that Dad left me his share of the house in his will, and you both kept that from me." "A will that was never properly executed," Arthur interjected, trying to regain control of the conversation. "There's a legal question about its enforceability after all this time." Jennifer smiled thinly. "The statute of limitations for will contests in Massachusetts is 1 year from discovery of the will, not from the date of death. My client only discovered the will's contents last week. Additionally, the regular mortgage payments establish a clear pattern of acknowledgement of his ownership interest." The legal back and forth continued for nearly an hour, with Jennifer methodically dismantling each argument Arthur presented. Throughout the meeting, I noticed my mother growing increasingly uncomfortable, while Harold became more agitated. Finally, Jennifer laid out our terms: immediate access to the house to retrieve my belongings, acknowledgement of my 50% ownership interest in the property, and a discussion about next steps whether that meant buying out my share, selling the house and dividing the proceeds, or some other arrangement. "This is blackmail," Harold spat. "After all we've done for him." "It's not blackmail, Mr. Brennan," Jennifer corrected calmly. "It's the law. Carter is legally entitled to his inheritance." Arthur pulled his clients aside for a private consultation, their hushed but heated discussion audible even from across the room. When they returned to the table, Arthur looked resigned. "My clients will allow Mr. Jenkins to retrieve his personal belongings tomorrow at noon," he said formally. "Regarding the ownership issue, we request time to consult with a probate specialist before proceeding further." Jennifer agreed, on the condition that they provide a written acknowledgement that I would be permitted to access the house at the agreed-upon time. As the meeting concluded, I finally caught my mother's eye. The woman who had raised me, taught me right from wrong, instilled in me the values of honesty and integrity, looked away first, unable to face the consequences of her deception. The next day, Jennifer accompanied me to the house. Harold opened the door with obvious reluctance, not stepping aside to let us in until Jennifer pointedly reminded him of the written agreement. The house felt different, hostile even, as I walked through rooms that had once been my sanctuary. Many of my belongings had indeed been thrown away or were mysteriously missing. What remained had been haphazardly stuffed into garbage bags and boxes. As I collected my things, I noticed my mother watching me from the doorway of her bedroom, her eyes red from crying. Harold hovered near her, his hand on her shoulder, in what might have looked like a gesture of comfort to an outsider, but which I recognized as a possessive, controlling grip. "Why, Mom?" I asked quietly when Harold stepped away briefly. "Why did you hide Dad's will from me?" She glanced nervously in the direction Harold had gone before whispering, "He said it was for the best, that you were young, living your own life in California, that you didn't need the burden of property ownership." "That wasn't his decision to make," I said. "Or yours. It was my inheritance." "I know," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, Carter. I should have told you." Before she could say more, Harold returned, effectively ending our conversation with his looming presence. The process of retrieving my belongings took several hours, during which Harold made snide comments, and my mother remained largely silent. When we finally finished, I stood in the entryway, looking at the house that was half mine, but no longer felt like home. "This isn't over," Harold threatened as I was leaving. "You're right," I agreed. "It's just beginning." True to Harold's word, they didn't go down without a fight. Over the next few weeks, their lawyer tried various tactics to delay or derail the legal process. They claimed the will was a forgery, that my father had verbally revoked it before his death, that the mortgage payments were gifts with no strings attached. Jennifer systematically countered each claim with documentation and legal precedent. She obtained an affidavit from my father's attorney confirming the will's authenticity. She compiled 6 years' worth of emails and bank statements, demonstrating the consistent pattern of mortgage contributions. She even tracked down my father's best friend, who testified that Dad had specifically told him about leaving his share of the house to me. The turning point came during a deposition when my mother, under oath, finally admitted the truth. Yes, she had known about the will. Yes, she had deliberately not filed it with probate court. And yes, Harold had convinced her to keep the inheritance a secret from me. "He said we would lose the house," she testified, tears streaming down her face, "that we couldn't afford to buy out Carter's half, that we'd end up homeless." When asked why she had continued to accept mortgage payments from me, knowing I already owned half the house, she couldn't provide a coherent answer. The judge's ruling was unequivocal. I owned 50% of the house based on my father's will, and my years of mortgage payments had effectively reaffirmed that ownership even without the formal probate process. With the legal question settled, we were left to determine what would happen with the property. Jennifer arranged a meeting to discuss options. They could buy out my share based on a professional appraisal, I could buy out their share, or we could sell the house and split the proceeds. "We don't have the money to buy you out," Harold admitted grudgingly, the fight seemingly gone out of him. "And I don't want to be co-owners with you," I said frankly. "So it seems selling is the only option." My mother looked devastated at the prospect of losing her home, but she didn't argue. The woman who had once been so vibrant, so full of opinions and strength, now just nodded along with whatever was decided. As we worked through the logistics of listing the house and dividing the proceeds, I requested a private moment with my mom. Harold initially refused, but Jennifer firmly insisted that he allow us to speak alone. In the kitchen, where we had shared so many meals and conversations over the years, I finally asked the question that had been haunting me since this all began. Was it worth it, Mom? Giving up our relationship for him? She looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time in years. I thought I had to choose, she said softly. Harold made everything seem so black and white, him or you. Security or uncertainty. You never had to choose, I told her. I would have always been there for you, no matter what. I know that now, she admitted, wiping away a tear. But by the time I realized what was happening, how controlling he had become, how isolated I was, it felt too late to change course. It's never too late, Mom, I said gently. Not until we're in the ground. She reached for my hand then, a tentative gesture of reconciliation. I'm so sorry, Carter, for everything. For the locks, for the lies, for choosing him over you. I squeezed her hand, not quite ready to forgive completely, but willing to take this small step toward healing. You can still make different choices, I reminded her. The house sold faster than expected, fetching a price that reflected the strong Boston real estate market. After paying off the remaining mortgage and splitting the proceeds, I found myself with enough money to buy a small condo in Cambridge, not far from Ryan's place. My mother and Harold used their share as a down payment on a smaller house in the suburbs. Despite my hopes that she might leave him, she stayed, bound by years of emotional manipulation and financial dependence. We maintained a tentative, fragile line of communication after everything was settled. Occasional phone calls, a birthday card, a brief coffee meeting when I was in her neighborhood. It wasn't the close relationship we once had and perhaps never would be again, but it was something. As for Harold, I never spoke to him again. Some bridges, once burned, cannot and should not be rebuilt. The day I closed on my condo was bittersweet. As I signed the final papers and received the keys to my new home, I couldn't help but think about the circumstances that had led me here. What should have been an exciting milestone was tinged with the lingering pain of betrayal and family fracture. My new place was modest but entirely mine. One bedroom, an open-concept living and dining area, and a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. It wasn't the house I grew up in, with its memories both good and bad, but it represented something perhaps more valuable: independence, security, and a fresh start. Ryan helped me move in, bringing along a housewarming gift of a quality tool set. For building new things, he said with a meaningful look. I understood the metaphor and appreciated it. The first night in my new home, I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes, eating takeout, and contemplating the strange journey that had brought me here. 6 months earlier, I had been a successful software developer in San Francisco, with a long-term girlfriend and plans for the future. Then came the job loss, the breakup, the humiliating return to my childhood home, and finally the shocking discovery of my inheritance and my mother's deception. The pain of being locked out of my own home, of receiving that cruel text message, still stung when I allowed myself to dwell on it. But I was learning to focus less on the hurt and more on the growth that had come from facing adversity. A week after moving in, I received an unexpected visitor. My mother stood at my door, looking nervous and clutching her purse tightly. "I hope it's okay that I came by," she said hesitantly. "Ryan gave me your address." I invited her in, offering coffee, which she accepted gratefully. As she looked around my new place, commenting politely on the layout and the natural light, I could sense she had something important to say. "Harold doesn't know I'm here," she finally admitted, staring into her coffee cup. "We've been struggling since everything happened. The new house is nice, but it doesn't feel like home." "It takes time," I offered, unsure what else to say. "Carter," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to explain. Not to excuse what I did, but so maybe you can understand." She told me how after my father died, she had fallen into a deep depression. Harold, who she'd already been dating for a year, had stepped in to handle the practical matters, including the funeral arrangements and the estate paperwork. "He was the one who found your father's will," she explained. "He told me that if we filed it with the court, we'd have to sell the house to buy out your share, and neither of us could afford that. He convinced me that it would be better for everyone if we just set it aside." "And the mortgage payments?" I asked. "Why did you keep accepting those when you knew I already owned half the house?" She looked ashamed. "It was wrong. I knew it was wrong. but Harold said it was just temporary until we got on our feet financially. Then months turned into years, and it became harder to tell you the truth. "You could have told me any time, Mom," I said, the hurt evident in my voice. "I would have understood financial struggles. What I can't understand is the deception." "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of losing the house, afraid of losing Harold, afraid of your anger." The longer it went on, the more frightened I became of the consequences. "And changing the locks? That text message?" I asked, still struggling to reconcile these cruel actions with the loving mother I once knew. Her face crumpled. "Harold sent that text, not me. He took my phone while I was in the shower. I was horrified when I found out, but by then it was too late. You were already gone, and he convinced me that it was for the best, that a clean break would be easier for everyone. Did you ever stand up for me, Mom? Even once?" The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. "Not enough," she whispered. "Not nearly enough, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life." We talked for hours that day, peeling back layers of hurt, misunderstanding, and regret. It wasn't a magical reconciliation where all wounds were instantly healed, but it was an important first step. Before she left, my mother handed me a small box. "These belong to your father. Harold wanted to throw them away, but I hid them." Inside were my father's cufflinks, his favorite watch, and several photos of him and me that I thought had been lost forever. "Thank you," I said, genuinely moved by the gesture. "I'm trying to find my way back," she said as she stood to leave. "To myself and to you. I hope someday you can forgive me." "I hope so too," I replied honestly. Over the following weeks, I focused on rebuilding my life. My remote IT job was going well, and I even received a promotion that came with a substantial raise. I joined a local hiking group where I made new friends, people with no connection to my complicated past. I started therapy to process the feelings of betrayal and abandonment that still surfaced unexpectedly. My mother and I continued our tentative reconnection. We met for lunch every other week, carefully avoiding certain topics at first, then gradually becoming more honest with each other. She revealed that she was seeing a therapist too, trying to understand how she had allowed herself to become so isolated and controlled. 3 months after our first meeting at my condo, she called with news that simultaneously shocked and relieved me. She had left Harold. She had rented a small apartment and filed for divorce. "He never hit me," she clarified when I asked. But I finally recognized that abuse isn't always physical. The control, the isolation, the constant criticism, that's abuse too. I helped her move into her new place, a modest, one-bedroom, not unlike my own. As we unpacked her few belongings, I noticed a lightness about her that I hadn't seen in years. Her laughter came more easily, her posture was straighter, her eyes clearer. "I should have done this years ago," she admitted as we took a break, sitting on her new couch with cups of tea, for both of us. "You're doing it now," I reminded her. "That's what matters." The healing wasn't linear or simple. There were setbacks and difficult conversations. Times when the hurt felt fresh again, when trust seemed impossible to rebuild. But we were both committed to the process, to finding our way back to some version of the mother-son relationship we once had. A year after the lock-changing incident, I invited my mother to dinner at my condo to mark what I called our rebirth day, the anniversary of beginning to rebuild our relationship from the ashes of what had happened. As we shared a meal I had cooked myself, my mother raised her glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," she said, "and to hard-won wisdom. To boundaries and self-respect," I added, "and to forgiving without forgetting." The journey from that devastating text message to this moment of cautious celebration had taught me painful but necessary lessons. I learned that sometimes the people who should love us the most can hurt us the deepest. That standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's essential. That forgiveness doesn't mean allowing yourself to be mistreated again. Most importantly, I learned that family is defined not by blood or legal documents, but by respect, honesty, and mutual care. Sometimes we have to lose what we thought was family to discover what family truly means. As I look back on everything that happened, I realize that in a strange way, Harold did me a favor by changing those locks. He forced me to fight for what was rightfully mine, not just the physical property, but my dignity, my self-worth, my independence. In trying to shut me out, he ultimately pushed me toward a stronger, more authentic life. I still own my condo. My mother is thriving in her newfound independence, and Harold, last I heard, was struggling financially after the divorce. The house where I grew up belongs to a young family now, and sometimes when I drive by, I see their children playing in the yard where I once played. Life continues its cycle, indifferent to our individual dramas. The wound of betrayal has scarred over, no longer raw but still visible if you know where to look. My relationship with my mother, while never again the uncomplicated bond of my childhood, has evolved into something more honest, more equal, and in some ways, more meaningful. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with a locked door and end with the discovery that you had the key all along. The key to your own strength, resilience, and capacity for growth through adversity. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who were treating you unfairly? How did you handle it, and what did you learn from the experience? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories, and share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes standing up for yourself is the most important thing you can do. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that even in your darkest moments, you have more strength than you know.